Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the really exciting and challenging pieces about, the 21st century and the rapid pace of change in government is really, I think a lot of government processes have not necessarily updated themselves to reflect current processes, and that there's nowhere this is more true than around data. I think everyone here in the room who produces a budget or produces a CAFR or does in-year reporting, they make that information available either as a book or online or in some format. But if you think about all the process that goes into that information and then ultimately how it gets out to the public, it's typically in a very static form. It's typically in a form that's very hard to access. And really, that doesn't actually unleash or unlock the full potential of that information. When you think about something like vendor payments, you may think about it as an accounting exercise, but to a vendor who's working with your agency, that's information about their fiscal solvency, right? To an academic, that's information about comparative procurement across jurisdictions. To a tech company, that might be an opportunity for innovation or investment or helping you identify cost-saving opportunities. But that really requires stepping back and thinking about the information that we have, and especially the financial information that government agencies collect, not just as a burden, not just as an accounting exercise, not just as something that must be collected for compliance reasons, but as a valuable resource that can be applied strategically to achieve transformational outcomes. I used to work for the city of Los Angeles before I joined Socrata, and I really saw this firsthand. In a controller's office that was not necessarily seen as one of the more innovative components of city government, we basically just, before we launched our data online, an accountant in the Los Angeles Fire Department couldn't see any of the transactions in LAPD, couldn't see any of the transactions in the Department of Transportation. We segregated our financial systems such that each accountant, each agency was in its own silo, even within our siloed financial system. And we decided to take all of that information, our full ledger, all of our transactions, all of our payroll, going back several years, and make it available online. And we found two incredible things. One, that there's actually a lot of people in the public who are really interested in this information, who just absolutely under no circumstances are ever going to deal with downloading our 500-page PDF budget and trying to understand what it means. Because the answer is it doesn't mean anything to a member of the public. It is a 500-page book in no way reflects the way in which a modern consumer of information interacts with anything. There's a great piece of research that Google brings to bear about micro moments, which is the way in which mobile consumers of information access data. And basically, the core insight is that you have about 40 seconds from the time they pull their phone out of their pocket to when they give up. Try and download your budget on your phone on 3G.
So you don't even get a minute.
You're not going to get too far, right? So firstly, we found there's this enormous untapped demand in the public for that information, for really insight about how their tax dollars are being collected and spent. And that led to new community conversation. It led to advocacy groups reaching out to us and saying, hey, can you help us find money for these projects? It looks like there's a lot going on here that we had no idea about. It led to community groups advocating for better use of bond funds, for example. And then internally, we found duplicate contracts that vendors that had gone department by department and leveraged our inability to look at ourselves internally and use that to their advantage to milk more money out of the city. We found fraud and abuse. We found highly unusual anomalies in payroll across departments. And ultimately, we were able to leverage this massive audience looking at this information to deliver both an internal operational impact as well as a substantial impact to our public. And that's really what Socrata's mission and vision is really to help government agencies think about their data as a strategic resource, no less impactful or transformative as oil in Texas or gold in Alaska, that has the potential to drive government forward, to transform the way in which we interact with our public, and to really revolutionize the way in which we operate. And it's been really fascinating to see, and working with really innovative thinkers like Comptroller Shack, you see this really incredible benefit and really incredible just outcome that happens. We talked in the previous session about the idea of government as a platform. But if you think about your data and your content as a platform for many others to do many great things with your information, you can really achieve incredible outcomes just by thinking about your data a little bit differently.
So, Tom, as Comptroller for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you folks have embraced this idea of putting data to work. Give us some description of how you're doing it, and put some specifics behind some of the things that Kyle just said.
So, I mean, it's hard to follow, Kyle on this issue because it's interesting because Socrata's mission clearly matched my own mission or my own organization's mission. In 2015, I was appointed Comptroller, as I said to a few people. In Massachusetts, it's a unique position because I'm appointed by the governor, I take my oath, and then I work for nobody. So the answer is...
That's really great.
No, and truly, I only work for the people of Massachusetts. And so, my job is to make sure that government is accountable, that it's, that transactions and the management of taxpayers' dollars is accurate, and then ultimately to make sure that there's clarity or transparency in that process. And to say that Massachusetts, when I took over as Comptroller, was challenged from a transparency standpoint is an understatement. And one of the major issues that I had originally coming into office was that our transparency site had been a customized, instance by a vendor. It took 5 years to customize, took 3 years to procure, 5 years to customize, went live in 2010, and was DOA in 2012 because it was no longer accessible utilizing Internet Explorer, which of course is is on 97% of the computers in the world. So our transparency site was a terrific concept, but absolutely ineffective. And so one of the first, and I had that, but I didn't control it. It was controlled by another office in Massachusetts, through legislation. And so but my office gets the phone calls because we manage the $60 billion every year, and we get the hundreds of public media, investigative reporters, public interest groups. They call and say, hey, look, you're not transparent at all. And I was really shocked because US PIRG had actually given us a very high grade for transparency. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I mean, that's terrific. We must be transparent in other places other than financial information. So the point is when we immediately started looking for a mechanism, a SaaS solution that would, or software as a service solution, and a cloud solution that would allow us to upload our financial data very quickly and get it to the people who count, which are the people that actually are paying. It's their money. And I remind our staff all the time of the fact that everything we deal with is not ours. It's a piece of it might be as a taxpayer yourself, but look out the windows. That's who whose devices we're using, whose money we're responsible for. So my goal was to specifically provide every bit of financial data that I possibly could to the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts and outside the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Just as important for some people in this room, just as important for bond rating agencies, and what we found when we started doing that research, we actually went from an idea to having 5 years of financial data, both payroll and expenditure data, up on a site that wasn't quite live yet, but within 90 days. Right, so because I'm independent and because I'm apolitical, I have the ability to be able to change my procurement model completely. I mean, I can simply go with the best value single source decision at any given time. That's what we did with Socrata, because our issue is getting data up fast. Now, the reason that it was so important to us was originally selfish. We wanted to cut down on those phone calls, but we also wanted to be able to utilize the data internally in our own organization to see where spending's happening, to check for fraud, waste, abuse, and as Kyle pointed out, one of the first things we found was I found a $3 million an intern being paid $3 million in one of the agencies. Now, that was instantaneous, and we caught it as it was going out the door. But things like that are happening every single day, and I'm not embarrassed to say that they were happening in Massachusetts. But now, instead of having 600 pairs of eyes on data. I have 6 million potentially pairs of eyes on data. And I welcome everybody to find fraud, waste, and abuse. So we've really empowered the public to be able to work with us and media, and we're exposing those areas that should be exposed, that are wasteful or where there's potential fraud. We too look at the contracting side of things and want to make sure that contracts aren't being misused in Massachusetts. I mean, and it was such an easy thing to do, and it was so inexpensive. And something that we don't talk about in state government is return on investment. And ROI is just something that's it's just mysterious to governments. And because I have an entrepreneurial background and teach entrepreneurship, that was one of the first things that I tried to get across to our staff and to other staffs, that the return on investment is incredible when you think of what you're saving. And we estimate that the cost of our system, which is less than our transparency system, which is less than $1 million a year, is saving close to $50 to $60 million a year in terms of just what we call AA cost, personnel costs, answering phones and having to get public data, get data for the public and provide it. That was an unanticipated benefit. That wasn't what we were thinking about. We were thinking about we didn't stop getting phone calls. So these advances and now the ability, we upload our data on a daily basis now, all of our transactions. We have a data warehouse that used to be used by agencies and departments. We have 151 departments. We just got our 151st, and that's the Cannabis Control Commission, which is new to us in Massachusetts, and we'll be watching that agency very closely and monitoring it very closely. But the point is this: that information warehouse where we used to have to go and run queries to get data out to make sure that transactions happened. Now agencies simply go on to see-through on a daily basis, and they can check every transaction that they've had. They can check every payroll run that happens, and so we're the first state to do that, and I'm very excited to be the first state to do that.
So, Tom, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned one state that will go unnamed, where you had looked at the site.
I think you mentioned the state.
Well, yes, they're the cover story in governing this month. But the data was
they're good neighbors.
Yeah, the data is a year old. How current is the data you're putting up for the Commonwealth?
So we have an automatic upload daily of all transactions from the previous day. And we're still utilizing legacy systems, both in payroll and in expenditure management. But that data is both uploaded daily, but also we're at that point now from a data standpoint where triangulation of PII or personal information is so important to protect against. I mean, look at Equifax and look what happened. I'm sure that if you may not know it yet, but most of this room has probably been breached in that process. And the fact is that that's our responsibility too in Massachusetts, is to protect the employees' data, to protect our vendor data. And so so that those daily uploads, and then when the payroll runs biweekly, it's uploaded instantaneously. And it's automatic. It doesn't take. We take the human factor out of it. So, you have to be very, very cautious about what data you're going to release. That's where the thought process has to be very, considerate. But we're as fast gets. You can't get it any faster unless we were just simply take the financial systems and put them on the web, which is kind of close to what we're doing.
Mm. And I think there's a couple really interesting, your point about PERG giving the state of Massachusetts a really high transparency score, I think is really kind of symptomatic of kind of the broader context here, which is that in government, in public advocacy, in government reporting, we're trained to focus on the content. So PERG goes through every state and says, is it technically possible to find this information? That's the threshold. Does it exist? And that's how they grade you, right? Yes or no. Do you have this information or not? But as we like to say at Socrata, the medium is the message. And the message that you send to your public and the actual communication that you have to your public, when the only way to do that is 17 clicks into your website and page 145 of a PDF or in a 12 gig CSV file, the message you're sending is we don't care about your time, we don't care about your access, and you can't actually find this. You don't have a right to know. And really the transformation that's happening when we talk about that strategic view of data, a huge part of it is thinking about the medium by which that data is conveyed. So not just is it there or not, but is it reasonable for a member of the public to access this information? Does it have sufficient context that a person without an accounting background could reasonably be expected to understand it? Is it mobile accessible? Can people with disabilities or those who have vision issues, is it 508 accessible? How quickly, is there an API? Is it machine readable? Can other developers or other software programs automatically read from that data? These are the kind of questions that actually impact the use of that data, because as Comptroller Shack mentioned, all of the data on see-through, more or less, was on the previous transparency site that was there. And yet the state was not transparent. And yet the public could not find that information. And yet journalists did not believe that the Comptroller's office was a transparent agency. It's not about the content anymore. That is sort of the wave of the 90s, maybe, the 80s, is like, we got to put our budget book online. It's going to be great. But it's 2017, and the world is changing very quickly. And one of the most important ways that it's changing is the value of data, right? Facebook is the whole value of that multi-billion-dollar company is based on data. And government also holds that really important data. And when you think about the way in which it's conveyed and how it actually reaches people, the impact you can have is just dramatically greater than just thinking about the checkbox sort of approach to transparency.
There's an interesting aside to what Kyle's saying. When we were actually getting the data, we were taking the live data out of our own system and uploading it, but we needed some historical data from the older open checkbook site. And the agency or the department that controlled that, I sent an instruction, provide the data, provide the old data to us so that we can, see it, utilize it. It was for quasi-governmental organizations, and utilize it and upload it to see-through. And, my CIO and deputy comptroller, waited, and, a month goes by and we don't have the data. And, then, I send another missive, send over the data, and nothing happens. And finally, I walked across the street to the organization. I walked in and I said, I'd like to make a public information request, for all of the data that you have in the open checkbook. That's the absurdity of government. When people, it doesn't make any difference. I don't get. I mean, if I get embarrassed as a result of something that shows up in see-through, I should be, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who really did not like the fact that we were putting up, salary history, and now, when it was buried on the other site, as Kyle said, it was, 12 clicks away. It was actually 13 clicks to get to it off the main website, and it was, really buried. Our site now, one click. Go to mass.gov/comptroller, click on transparency. You're in the see-through site, and it's a big, banner on the front. We cannot get any more transparent than that. But I will say this: the resistance, has to change within state government. State government has to start embracing, and all government, local, municipal. If you're responsible for taxpayers' dollars, you have to, be accountable for it, and you ought to be, sharing it in the best way you can and the quickest way you can. So, apropos of what you were saying, it's very, very important. It's a change in thought process and thought pattern for government. And I hope that, since we're on the leading edge of yet another revolution, and there's another one coming, on the heels of this, as it relates to our financial systems. And so we are going to be constantly innovating and engaging in revolutionary transformation.
I'm interested, you mentioned the resistance. I'm interested in how various groups of stakeholders reacted. Have you heard from citizens? Have you heard from businesses? What are the reactions, and how do they vary?
So it's interesting. One of the most interesting things that you would not expect to happen in the history, particularly with Boston media, right? The history of government in Boston media and government itself in Massachusetts has been pilloried pilloried for generations, right? Government workers are hacks, and now look at all the salaries, and it's all a big hack game. So from our standpoint now, that accountability is not only critically important, but also the ability for us to be able to and I apologize because I lost the thought on your question. Tell me your question. More time.
Basically, so for example, the media.
Yeah. Oh,
have,
yeah.
have they begun to change their perception?
Yeah. So the media. So that's what I wanted to hit on. The media in Boston has the investigative media, and I'm a former publisher, so I can relate to and I believe the basis of that is that free press is the concept behind government and media working together. So there are a lot of investigative reporters in Massachusetts that love the aha moment, or as we lawyers call it, the Perry Mason moment. Governor's walking out the door. Governor, why is this intern making $3 million? To his credit, the governor's very, very good at answering those questions. But the fact is that the instances have literally fallen off. They have, and every investigative reporter in Massachusetts has my personal cell phone number. So, tell me a public official who takes direct cell phone calls at 11 o'clock at night from investigative reporters, and I will tell you, there's probably only one, and that's me. I hope there's going to be more.
Well, that's one that's not standing for re-election.
Exactly. Well, that's and truly, that is it is important. That independence is certainly important, and the fact is that elections are really, really challenging situations for people who want to do the right thing. Right. You have to and we deal with that all the time. Our elected officials, they love the fact that the data is available. But they also don't like to have to answer the questions of why is this happening? How did this contract happen? Why is this payment X dollars? But another unintended benefit of that for the legislators, particularly the state legislators, the representatives and the senators within the state, is that we can now see and they can see the contracts that are taking place in their own jurisdictions. Right, so now we can be pushing for internal Massachusetts, small business contracts, which so many contracts, most of our contracts come from out of state. So now we can actually boost and benefit our businesses just utilizing the data of what contracts are we contracting for outside the state. So.
Yeah, I think that's really that. It's always those other stakeholders, I think, that kind of come out of the woodwork that really surprise you. Socrata, about a year ago, we did an analysis of all of the use of open data and open financial data, and we found, for example, that realtors and business owners are actually the primary audience for municipal open data and for financial transparency. That investigative reporters. I remember a great story you told me about looking at credit card or P card.
Right.
Transactions. It's really those kind of other stakeholders that come out of the woodwork that you don't necessarily explicitly acknowledge or even know about that benefit. And that's really the power of just taking an open approach, making information available, and empowering whoever shows up.
Yeah, just one final thought about that. We had an investigative reporter ask for all P card or credit card charges from the Commonwealth. We have credit cards for travel. Use it to get here today. And those are not posted, but on the website. But the bank that issued the cards to Massachusetts, those payments are on the website. And so what happened was this investigative reporter was teaching a class at Northeastern University, and one of the students actually said, "Hey, what are all these little payments to Bank of America, from these different agencies?" And and came to us and asked, and we provided every credit card charge for a year, going backwards to that group, and they parsed through them and found a significant number of inappropriate charges. That's the kind of thing that that some people will get very upset with me, but that's the kind of thing that makes my day, because that's what our responsibility is is to the public.
Don't make the bad charges. So, questions, comments.
John Hageman, City of Detroit. In your last example, you mentioned, folks finding improper charges on the P card. Could you talk a little bit about how the Commonwealth is using information like that to change their operations, whether it be better internal controls, restructuring organizations, improving processes?
Sure. So one of the things that I did when I became Comptroller is I created a Chief Risk Officer for the Commonwealth immediately. And so we have, we know that we're going to lose a significant portion of our staffing across the state to the silver tsunami, to people retiring. And so we have to have systems in place to be able to maintain those internal controls. Now, internal controls with systems themselves, systems are, it's always interesting. Systems, I heard somebody say this one time, systems are perfect. It's the people that use them, that make the mistakes, right? So your password is absolutely, the machine is never going to give up your password. It's going to be you that gives up the password due to a phishing expedition in email. But, getting back to your question, the internal control side of it is, it had a very dramatic impact on a large group of people, and we immediately changed the P card requirements. Now we have P card training. I require everybody that gets a P card to go through training, fraud, waste, and abuse training, and they do it, and then they sign a document saying that they acknowledge, that, So what happened was basically the agencies started taking away those P cards. From anybody that, I can cancel the P card, at any time, and I can limit people's use of it. But those internal controls within the organizations themselves immediately became visible, immediately became, it was just, they are on top of it now. Now, that might happen 100 times over the course of, 5 or 6, 10 years. And every time it happens, we get better. And so that's exactly what we want to have happen, is we want smart, youthful, technology savvy people to get in and parse the data and ask those questions, because I'll tell you, we weren't examining the Bank of America statements the way they did.
And I think just to, I think there's that great concept in auditing, tone at the top when you're evaluating an agency from a controls perspective, and what better tone at the top to set than everything you do will immediately be published to the New York Times. Like that's a pretty, or to the Boston Herald. That's a pretty great, in terms of changing a culture or sort of a perception of what the role of the government employee is or the accountant is. That's
bracing.
Pretty transformational kind of change there.
All right, we got time for one more.
Hi, I'm Rob Kodiri. I work for Multnomah County, Oregon. So I see a lot of benefits and drawbacks for the public information being so transparent. And though we don't have such a sophisticated system that you have right now, I currently receive a lot of inquiries that come through public, and it takes a lot of my time. And I'm not saying that's bad necessarily. In some cases, it's in fact is good. But how do you deal now that, so I'm curious, did the volume of inquiries to your office go up? And how do you forecast the workforce? I don't mean just skill set of people that you have, which I think is a problem right now, but also the capacity to build those kind of positions, to build that kind of infrastructure that could handle those questions, whether from professional media or neophytes who are just exploring the public system, or businesses that have very particular interest in that information. If you could just talk about that, that would be great. Thank you.
So really, hopefully really briefly, the fact is in Massachusetts it costs $30 to write a check, right? It costs $30 to write a check for $1.17 to a vendor for an underpayment. And so going to your example of drawbacks, I don't see any. I just don't see any drawbacks at all. Number one, but number two, the savings, the human resource savings or the AA or payroll savings are probably unascertainable in some respects. But I can tell you this: there are organizations and agencies that no longer get requests for public information because they were getting regular requests for payroll. Every 2 weeks a reporter from Springfield would call and they'd ask for the same payroll, run. And there's 151 agencies and there's 151 public information officers who are responsible for answering public information requests. So now they don't have to answer any questions relative to finance. And my instruction to all of them is provide is send them to see-through, mass.gov/comptroller. That's it. They go there, one click away, they get the information. So, I mean, I can't ascertain it, but what I can tell you is it's in the tens of millions of dollars on an annual basis, just for financial information.
Yeah, and I think I can speak specifically to LA, and then in broadly what we see, we work with about 1,000 governments at this point. So particularly in LA, when we released our checkbook information, we actually saw a little bit of a spike in public records requests because we had folks looking for fun things in our data, and they found things like LAPD's purchases of cocaine for testing purposes, and the previous mayor of LA spent $2,000 on a taco truck for an event one time. We hired a circus for kids for the weekend, so it was Jumbo Shrimp Circus was in the data. So yeah, those initial kind of like funny public questions, but I think to Tom's credit and to many of the more innovative programs, really when they approach this question of transparency, the first question they ask is, what are people already asking for? So I can tell you nationally, this is something we survey, the 3 most commonly requested pieces of information by the public are in order payroll, vendor payments, and then budget information. And internally, it's budget versus actuals, followed by transaction details, followed by paychecks. So if you take that approach and say, okay, what are people already asking for? What do I know I'm producing FOIA requests already. How many of those can I automate? And the answer is usually a lot, because most of those requests are asking for the same payroll run every 2 weeks, vendor calling, when is my check? Where's my check? Where's my check? And if you build your program in a way that is designed to encompass the requests you've already seen, you tend to see a dramatic decrease in those requests. And even when you do get those requests in, instead of having to do the full multi-hour round trip to your core financial system, produce a report, process that report, write a cover letter, whatever else, your response can be, here you go. And that's a much more efficient process, even if the number of requests doesn't change.
And I think that's really important. We had 150,000 hits. I mean, and one of the great things about our partnership with Socrata is the metrics that we actually draw from that. But we had 150,000 hits, and then we had, in December and January of last year and this year, we had more than 10,000 hits per month. So the point is that there are people going to the site now. I mean, so those people are they may be picking up the phone and calling someone, but I can tell you that there's a state employee that's not going to get the information for them because it's just available.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have. I'm going to invite Liz Farmer up. She's going to talk about pensions. Interesting, sustainable solutions from tough challenges.